I compare myself today to who I was 2 or 3 years ago, there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of differences. Um, I've lost a bunch of weight. One obvious physical one. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now, which I'm super into. Really, really passionate about. Um, I read a lot more. I try to have a different perspective, more of an open mind and a truly kind of empathetic learning mentality rather than assuming I know better or questioning people to try and win or prove I'm right. It's more about trying to learn. I'm very big on building mental toughness. That's a big one. Callous the mind, as David Goggins would say, with the intent of just trying to build those muscles of understanding that there are things that are uncomfortable or painful at times, but they're good for us and we need to do them. And not always physical, right? Oftentimes psychological, mental things. But you need to get comfortable with that. You need to build that skill because our mind naturally doesn't want to do that. So I say all that because I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and I've talked about, one of the other things different now than 2-3 years ago is I try and do more of these kind of challenges, like the 4x4x48 David Goggins challenge, or what I'm currently doing, the 75-day Get Hard challenge by Andy Frisella. So I was kind of casually mentioning to a friend, it was actually yesterday while football was on, somebody texted, and one way or another they asked if I was drinking, hanging out, watching the games, having a good time, etc. And I mentioned that I can't drink because I'm doing this challenge with my brother, and you're not allowed to drink during it. And the reaction was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Why would you do that? Like, what's the point? Why would you do something where you can't drink during football season? It's super fun to drink on Sundays and watch the games, just have a good time. And like, that's just weird. Why would you take on this weird challenge? What is it doing for you? And it's funny because the reaction to that is important, at least from my perspective. Because it would be easy for me to dismiss and just say, oh, he doesn't get it. Like, he doesn't understand the way I live now, and he's mocking it or he's critical of it. So forget him. I'm going to dismiss him and ignore it, right? Or it would be easy to kind of claim a quote unquote kind of moral high ground and try and school him and say, well, I'm doing this for XYZ reason, and it's good for me, and it's good to be healthy, and it's good to build mental toughness, and be very much more preachy and declarative, and try and almost not shame him, but try and make it clear that I have a better approach and he should understand that. Right? Those are two common ways in which to respond to something like that. And if I think of myself a few years ago, I probably would have taken the bait on either one of those. But I think the right approach, and I've talked about this in other videos, is when you're talking to somebody who doesn't understand what you're doing, or is skeptical, or is cynical even to some extent, I think the right approach is to follow the things I mentioned before. Be empathetic, be humble, try and approach it in such a way where, for lack of a better phrase, if you're trying to build credibility, you're trying to show that this new approach or this thing that you're doing, it has validity to it, but do it in a way in which speaks to your actual audience and does it in a way that builds credibility and doesn't just have like an air of arrogance and assume you know better. Right? Because if I think of it from my friend's perspective, if I really try and empathize with him, which is relatively easy for me to do because he's been a friend of mine for a long time, and in many ways growing up through high school even together, I know how he thinks, I know how I think. Like, we thought very similar for a long time. So I could put myself close to in his shoes. And I would look at somebody, if I put myself in those shoes, like me right now, and say, oh, you've become one of those kind of weird health freaks, kind of trying to do all this stuff around like well-being and mental wellness and all this stuff. And like, you've just gotten weird. Like, you've taken a weird approach. You're doing all this weird stuff now, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're reading all these weird books, you're talking about all this weird stuff, you're making these videos, you're doing these challenges. I get it. I see where you are, right? That's the assumption I have of how he's viewing me when I try and empathize with him. And again, you can respond to that in the two ways we talked about, or you could say, hey, I get it. I totally understand how you're probably looking at me right now. And truth be told, I could still put myself in those shoes and understand and say like, yeah, it is kind of weird. Like it really is. But let me explain why it's a little different. And let me do it in a way in which builds credibility. I've also talked about this concept of breaking the set, right? You take an instance like that and it would look the same if I did just become quote unquote weird and kind of got brainwashed into this new lifestyle and was just kind of blindly following it, and I thought this was the way to live and I wanted to be preachy, etc., it would look similar to that, or look the same in that case, or in the case in which I think it is, where it's not that I am blindly following this. It's not that I'm doing this for show or anything like that. I'm just doing it because it's beneficial. Like, I've actually seen results from it. I run my cost benefit and it spits out a positive. So that's why I do it. So again, back to the point of how can I convey this message to him? How do I do it in an empathetic, humble way, which leads to something productive, not just me dismissing or being arrogant and claiming I know better. Acknowledge that, which is what I did, to say, like, dude, I totally get it. If I were you sitting where you're sitting, I'd look at me and be like, what a freak show. Like, what are you doing, dude? What's going on? But I tried to explain to him, like, I get that totally, and I still think that sometimes. But here's like some real benefits I see from it. So this is just math in some ways. There's logic here. There's things that I wanted to do different in my life and be better, right? I wanted to be in better shape. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. There's certain habits I wanted to try and break. I wanted to be less angry, all sorts of things. And I'm seeing results. So it's not weird. It's not crazy. It's just logical. It's working in some way, right? And, you could use all different examples. I have another friend who recently watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And when he first watched it, was caught up in what you might imagine, if anybody that's seen it, like, hey, social media is super negative. It's bad. They're tricking us in all sorts of ways. They're playing on our minds. Like, you got to get off it. And he was very passionate. Like, you got to get off social media. And he deleted all his social media stuff and he was done with it. Not even a week later, he's back on social media. And I use that as an example, right, of that's the type of thing, right? The things I'm trying to do, the reason I'm doing these challenges, I'm trying to build mental toughness, all that stuff, is because it allows you to do that, right? If you make a decision and say, hey, I know this is better for me to get off social media, for example, this gives you the mental toughness, the capability to actually follow through on that. Now, for this friend I'm talking about who was questioning the 75-day challenge, maybe he doesn't care about social media. But odds are there's something in his life that he wishes could be different, but it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult for him to do. So my point to him was, this stuff seems to be useful in doing that in a very practical, pragmatic way. So I totally get it. I understand just from the outside looking in, it looks weird. And some of it is weird, frankly. But let me explain why. But be honest and build credibility in saying there are parts of it that are weird. Not just claim I know better than you now.